Try that again. There we go. So, good evening, everyone. I'm Jodi Pushkin. I'm the manager of the Tampa Bay Times Newspaper and Education Program, and we are very excited that we have two fabulous reporters here to talk to you today. And I am going to, I'm just going to ask you if your name is not the way you registered, if you could just go ahead and change your name so it is the way you registered, or at least that your last name is there so that we can make sure that we clock attendance for the certificates. Oh, and we're doing a drawing at the end of the webinar as well. So I am going to introduce Lauren Peace first. Lauren has written some incredible stories, and I sent you some links earlier today. And I don't have a long introduction, Lauren, so you can just go ahead and jump in.
Sure. Am I kicking off with my presentation or
Yes.
just okay? Oh, okay, great. Okay, super. Hi everyone. I'm Lauren Peace. I'm an enterprise reporter at the Tampa Bay Times. A lot of people don't know what enterprise means. I don't think it's a very good title, but it basically means narratives reporter. So I am writing stories, not necessarily like quickly off of the news, though sometimes we strive for that, but where I'm digging deeper into an issue affecting our community and oftentimes trying to tell stories with one central character, sort of an emblematic source that is representative of something much greater or deeper happening in our community. So I have a presentation today. I thought it would be sort of an apt way in, and I'm going to pull it up on my screen, but I warn I'm not great at tech, so we're gonna let me
There
know
should
if
be a
this.
little green share button.
Okay, I think are you seeing it now?
Yes. Good job.
Okay, cool. That was easier than I thought. So, yeah, this is a presentation that I adapted actually from a training that I gave to our newsroom about narrative journalism and sort of what goes in to writing a scene that sort of puts you in a character's head or like in a moment in time. I teach a journalism class at the University of Tampa too, and this is something that we talk a lot about with our students is how do we go from on Thursday afternoon at 3 p.m. outside of the mayor's office, so and so said XYZ, to something that feels a little bit more like a story that you can fall into in the way that like creative nonfiction might or fiction. But obviously we have the extra onus of making sure everything is verifiable, factual, and writing from reality, which is sometimes easier and sometimes harder. Behind the scenes of narrative journalism, how reporters build scenes and develop characters using records and more. The standard process is kind of what I just described. We're typically there in person, observing something happening, writing it down, talking to people who are accessible to us because we're in the room with them, and then verifying and fact checking. And so that looks something like this. These are two examples of stories that were written by colleagues where we were in person reporting. It's observational in detail. It's what we're writing into our notebook as we're there. So capturing a sense of movement. I always say to my students when we're writing narratives, we want to appeal to the five senses. So that's what you'll see here. In a hazy sea of tie-dye at Bayboro Brewing, the Deadheads bust out dance moves like you've never seen. Women twirl in floor-length dresses. Someone near the stage performs standing crunches with jazz hands. Another guy flexes his fingers like he's casting shadow puppets or maybe a spell on the musicians in front of him. Almost everyone seems to have a ponytail. So this was from a piece that Gabrielle Calise did on the Tampa Bay cover bands. She went to a few bars. She was there in person, observing, talking to people, and then was able to pen a story that way. This is from a story that I wrote about our housing crisis. I caught wind of families living in motels and hotels around US 19 or along US 19, and wanted to sort of delve in and understand why and how these families got there and really the impacts of the housing boom and crisis on family dynamics. And so I went to a motel, and I spent sort of a series of 3 months at the motel with families that were in the middle of this. And so again, I'm there in person, I'm seeing it. I'm using dialogue, right? So there are people who are talking together. I'm using details that maybe tell a story instead of saying XYZ happened. This is just an example of how, even though it's still reporting, it's verifiable fact that we are observing, that we are checking out, we're sort of creating a sense of place. So from the second story porch of the Palm Harbor Inn, Jennifer Spencer leaned back in a folding chair and watched as her 5-year-old granddaughter plunged a wood chip into a sun-dried cockroach. Ellie, Jennifer gasped, really? So I'm there, right? I'm hearing her say this. Crouched low on 2 bare, dirt-covered feet, Ellie dipped her nose toward the concrete. Her brown curls hung loose in her face, but the kindergartner kept the focus of a surgeon. Here on the walkway outside of room 218, there were plenty of pesky patients to practice on. Still tricky as a reporter, because you're going and you're observing and you're taking everything in, and you're scrawling in your notebook, and then you're trying to craft together the scene, but more simple than some of the coverage that we'll talk about later, because I'm there, I'm seeing it happen. And so the verification process is a little bit easier than reconstruction, which is when we would write a scene like this, but without being there. Also, Jodi, I can't see anybody or anything, but if folks have questions, they're welcome to throw them in the chat as we go.
If
So
you have
feel free
questions,
to
go ahead and throw them in the chat, and then when she's done, if you want to unmute, you can.
Perfect. Yeah, feel free to jump in. Just somebody shout and flag me, because I'm talking to my power. I can't see anything, so let me know. Cool. One more, again, going back to the appeal to senses, right? It's something that we think about, and something that you guys can impart on your students, be it English majors, or I guess students in English class, or in a journalism class, always appealing to the senses. So he drives to a nondescript business park and unlocks a nondescript office that smells strongly of new carpet. 10 sportily dressed, immaculately groomed men arrive, one only 16, the oldest, few in their mid-20s. They play cornhole as electronic dance music blares through a Bluetooth speaker. Liam sips sugar-free Red Bull. You can taste that. There's something so evocative about the sugar-free. Kills the lights and leads them in a Wim Hof breathing exercise, deep rhythmic exhalations. He stands under a blood red logo splashed on the wall, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the 5 senses, our reporter was there with them. He watched this happen. He wrote it down. Okay. When we're talking about narrative journalism, we're typically talking about news you can feel. And this is from Walt Harrington, who was a long-term editor at the Washington Post, that I think really kind of sums up our marching orders, if you will, on the enterprise team. So we're looking for journalism that uncovers, describes, and evokes the texture, tone, and meaning, the warp and woof, as people say, more than the crucial role of intimate journalism comes suddenly and inevitably to the fore. It is not news you can use, as the modern catchphrase goes, but news you can feel. That's not quite true. I would say that the best journalism is both news you can use and news you can feel, and that's certainly what we strive for. But I think the news you can feel can get lost sometimes, and we're really lucky here in the Tampa Bay area to have a strong history of the combination. So this is where some of my reporting gets tricky. I cover domestic violence and have really made that kind of a focus of my beat for the last year, a little more than a year. And so a lot of times I am writing stories about things that have happened that I was not there to witness in person. And we still want to have that sort of narrative fabric, right? We still want it for the reader to feel like you're there, you're watching this happen in real time. And so how do we do that? Or what happens when writing these complicated stories where there are people in really vulnerable situations and they're unwilling to talk, or a law enforcement officer is unwilling to talk? We turn to records and more to flesh out characters and recreate scenes. And so I think that this is really important when we're talking about news literacy or media literacy. I hear a lot about oh, well, how can we trust it? How can we? And the answer is the news organizations that are um, doing good factual journalism, especially at the local level, everything is painstakingly verified. I have spent literal hours, and that's not an exaggeration, on calls with my editor doing some of the stories that we've done where we've just debated a single paragraph and the choice of a word because accuracy is key and it's at its center. And records are what we really rely on to make sure that we're accurate and that what we're saying is true and fair. So we treat reporting for details like an investigation on the narratives team, meaning we're really digging. We're putting on our detective hat and we're trying to problem solve in real time. How can we say something if we're gonna say it, and if we think it's true, how can we ensure that it is? And so we start by thinking about what might be accessible to us if we weren't there in person. For each story, we make a list: what public records exist, what private records exist. So public records, I'm talking about like any information that would be accessible through Florida's sunshine laws. So emails between government officials, police investigation reports, court records, the list goes on, and we'll get into that more. Private records, I'm talking about things that we have on our phones, right? So text messages that were sent that could document or help me create a timeline, videos that people have taken with the timestamps, right? Because if somebody shares a video with me, I can go back and I can look at the metadata and see when it was taken, photos, etc. We also think about if there are scenes in a story that we're going to be writing about, but we weren't there at the moment that the event happened. Is it somewhere that we can visit after the fact just to collect sort of sensory information, or to get an understanding of what something might have felt like? Can we go there in person? Who else can we talk to, right? Obviously, we have our central sources, but we so often need to expand beyond them. So who else is in the know? And then what does the internet remember? I use that broadly to basically say social media, right? Like YouTube, Facebook posts, Instagram posts, geo location data, right? Maps. I can look at how landscape has changed over time using Google Maps and Google Images. I can see the color of somebody's house in 2015, things like that. So this wealth of resources online. And often we are combining those records to write a scene. Staying organized, people ask me that a lot. I create a master timeline. This is what I think a lot of narrative journalists do, where I'm putting everything that I have, so my public records, my private records, all of the reporting notes that I've done, and I'm creating a chronology that sort of lives in one document that I can go back to. And that is really important during the fact-checking process. So for writing an accountability story, or any story that we've sort of poured substantial resources into, there's a pretty hefty fact-checking process where we have to go through line by line and say where information came from. If I didn't have that master chronology that I could pull from, I would be totally lost. These are examples. These were short-term stories, but of just the chronology that I'm talking about. This actually isn't mine. This is a colleague's, but it was for writing a story after Hurricane Milton and Helene landed, where we were compiling information from all sorts of people, right, who were sending us primarily private records, videos, text messages, etc., but also public records, and we were kind of creating this timeline to put them together. So in red, you can just see the various primary sources that we were using: videos, texts, videos, audio from radio traffic. That would have been a public record, a photo texted interview, and we kind of piece it together. This is my timeline. It's from the Audrey Peterson story that I did. If you haven't read it, I know Jodi shared links, but it's about a domestic violence homicide. And I had a lot of both public and private records for this. And so I create a timeline with timestamps. What I typically do is I link back to, if it came from audio, I'll link back to the audio recording. And then in red, that's examples of like if somebody, if there's a text, right? If there's a written piece of communications, it isn't always going to be grammatically correct. And I need a way to sort of signal to myself, okay, this isn't grammatically correct, but this is the way it was written. It is the true way that it appeared in the message. And so I'll tag words in red. I'll write my own observations in orange. Everyone has their own system, but I put that there as a sloppy example for you to see. Okay, public records. When I'm talking about public records, these are some of the ones that I use most often, but they're far more expansive than this. 911 audio we can request, body-worn camera footage from police officers we can request, agency investigation reports and corresponding photos, personnel files, so that could be disciplinary records. And actually we can get those, for a police officer or for somebody who works in the mayor's office or for teachers in the school system, right? We can get complaints that have been filed or disciplinary records. Medical examiner's notes, salaries, citations, voter registrations, property records, marriage and divorce records, court filings and transcripts. The list goes on. So here are a few examples. I'm just going to go through them kind of quickly of where I and my reporting or colleagues in their own have used these records to recreate a scene. So this is again from the Audrey Peterson story. I just got a text from him. She told the operator, trembling, "My 3 daughters' names are Kelly, Michelle, and Jen." And he said, "Kelly, Michelle, and Jen are going to miss you. Bye." "I take that as a threat on my life," she pleaded. Earlier, she explains, Scosa had pulled into her driveway and revved his engine. She calmed down in the 30 minutes since, splashing water on her face to look presentable, but she wore worry like an article of clothing, her arms crossed, fingers rubbing the crook of her elbow. She'd been losing sleep, late to work twice in a row. And so this was pulled, those first two quotes are direct from the 911 audio. So because she called 911, because I had the name of the caller, but also the location is actually what you need to request it, I was able to access the audio of the 911 call. And so that's direct from 911. And then the bottom graph is from when the police officer actually comes out to visit her. His body-worn camera footage is on. And so I'm able to see her crossing her arms and rubbing her fingers and against the crook of her elbow and telling him, that she had calmed down and was splashing water on her face, telling him that she'd been losing sleep. So that was direct from those records, but we're able, because we have those, to recreate the sense that we were there, and create that experience for the reader that you were there. But it's all totally factual and verifiable. Okay. Medical examiner's reports. This is, you'll find that I write about sad topics a lot, but so I'm sorry to do this to you. But this was about a story following Hurricane Ian. And we had gotten this long list, kind of a spreadsheet of every death related to the hurricane. I think we got name, age, county, and cause of death. And most of the deaths were, drownings or blunt force traumas. But I noticed a number of suicides. And that led to a story on sort of the tolls of natural disasters on mental health. And us telling the stories of the people who we had lost, all of whom were senior citizens. And so this story was complicated because it was really sensitive, and a lot of people didn't want to talk with us about losing their loved one to suicide. Or some of these folks didn't have family who could speak to their life. And so we had to kind of get creative and fleshing out portraits of who they were. And we did that through medical examiners' reports, and then actually largely through Facebook, which I will explain down the line. But there was the 81-year-old man whose winter home was ruined, who was despondent over the loss of his belongings. The 65-year-old man in Cape Coral who had struggled with mental illness most of his life, who had faced housing insecurity once before and was scared to do so again. He left a note making reference to the destruction of his home. There was a 79-year-old staunch conservative who wore suspenders and a sun hat. He was a bookish man, described by one neighbor, who had a military background working with submarines. Then there was the 69-year-old retired nurse living on Pine Island. She was still grieving the husband she'd been with for 36 years, who had died the year prior. Her body was found when she didn't show up to family Thanksgiving. So that started with medical examiners' reports that gave us sort of the details. And then I was able to request police investigation reports and also do some sort of digital sleuthing. Okay. So sometimes when we're doing this work, if we're writing an accountability story, especially, there are people in charge who either won't talk to us or simply can't talk to us because they're lawyers for the department or saying, hey, look, we'd love to, but we can't right now because we're worried about a lawsuit. And so a task that I have often is how do I make people come to life who aren't communicating with me. And so we did that in the Audrey Peterson story, again through 911 audio and investigation timelines and body worn camera footage. And in this story, we really, those debates that I was talking about with my editor, the thing that we labored over the most was we wanted to make sure that the story that was about the death of a woman who had reached out to police multiple times over a week, who had been texting officers that she was scared, who had gone to the court to file for an injunction, we wanted to make sure that it was clear that we weren't faulting the individual officers who seemed to be trying to help her, but that the story was more about these breakdowns in the system. And that was really tricky to do. But this final scene, I think, is where we get at that. You can sort of see the pain of this responder. And this came from 911 audio, police investigation timelines, and body worn camera footage combined. So about a minute after she found him, Peterson lay at the step, taking gasping, gargled breaths. Seconds later, Scosa lifted a gun to his head and pulled the trigger. It's from 911 audio and police investigation reports, so the combination. As sirens blared, officers circled. Bremis saw her first. That's body-worn camera footage, so I am listening to the sirens. I'm seeing the officers get information. Victim right here, he panicked. God damn it. I'm hearing that on the camera footage. He'd come from a day of traffic stops and accident injuries, of conducting a welfare check and assisting another agency. That line, we requested his work log. So any police officer, you can see sort of everything that they've responded to in a day. And that was a really late ad, but we added that because we wanted to paint sort of a picture of the abnormality of this case and sort of the wide array of responsibilities that these patrol officers have, who are the first responders to people in really complicated and dangerous situations. He touched Peterson's neck. She was cold. That came from his written report. Several feet away, Scosa lay dead, but Bremis didn't recognize him. He hadn't met with him, not in person. No officer had. They'd only talked by phone. Shit, dude, Bremis's voice wobbled. I've been out here the past fucking week. He told another officer she'd applied for an injunction, but it got fucking rejected. Days later, a police report arrived at the state attorney's office recommending the state bring charges against a 71-year-old Dunedin resident who had been stalking his ex-girlfriend. And that came from the state attorney's office referral that was sent by the department. So I got that from the courthouse. Okay. Private records. So those are public records, right? That's stuff that we as journalists and you as community members have a right to access. Anyone can submit a request. Private records are a little trickier, but they are vitally important when it comes to my work, especially because a very limited portrait of or a very limited slice of sort of the larger picture is accessible to me often through public records. It's private records that really allow me to patch these stories together. And so when I'm talking about private records, again, these are things that people keep, right? That we have records of that aren't accessible and haven't been put anywhere else. But text messages, call logs, voicemails and voice memos, diary entries, sticky notes that people keep around their houses, family photos and videos, security footage, calendars, belongings. These are things that when I'm making contact with a source at the beginning of my reporting process, I'm explaining to them what I need to write, a line that like everything has to come back to a verifiable fact. And I'm explaining that these are things that I'll want access to or that could help me tell the story justly. So this is an example of a diary entry that Christopher Spada, who's my colleague on the investigations team, actually kind of instructed one of his sources to take. It was somebody who was going to watch the rocket launch, and Spada couldn't join him because of resources. And so he said, hey, can you just keep a journal like while you go? Can you write down and log sort of your experience? And so a source kept a journal, and he was able to write this this really nice scene that would have been difficult to reconstruct without that. Drafts, written notes. This is an example of a draft obituary from a story that we did around COVID time that actually my boss now, Claire McNeil, wrote, and she got access to. Parts of this also come from an email exchange between sisters in this family. So again, they shared the records when she asked. Writing from video. This is from that hurricane post-hurricane sum up that I was talking about. I'm going to kind of speed through some of these because I don't want to go over on time, and I think I'm already getting close to it. But again, all of these details came from video that people shared with us when we asked them to. And I think actually I want to call attention to just this bottom line really quickly. At 10:30 p.m., Gualtieri surveyed the streets from a high water vehicle at the corner of Bay Pines Boulevard and 100th Way, North Seminole. Cars stood dead in the intersection with water up to the windshields. Are people still in those cars? He wondered. The sheriff, though relatively media friendly, is pretty deadpan. And so my colleague was having a hard time getting him to sort of expand and describe. And he finally said, do you have any photos? Do you have any videos that you can share? And so it took, what would have been a line that basically said, we worked hard out there, Gualtieri said, and it getting that video allowed him to write in this sort of more evocative narrative way. Writing from photos, plumes of dust laced with lead blow across the factory like a sandstorm. The poison hangs thick in the air. Sometimes the only thing visible is the warm orange glow of the furnace. This is from the Pulitzer Prize-winning story Poisoned that was published a few years back. And this was the photo that was sort of the inspiration for that. One thing I do want to call note to is obviously we're writing descriptively from a photo, but a photo is only one teeny tiny piece of verification, right? There were hundreds of photos and dozens of interviews that were sort of patched together to be able to say, okay, yes, this is true and accurate. But the photo is an important part of that because our reporters never stepped foot in the factory. They were barred from doing so. And so images are what helped bring it to life. Okay. Coaching sources to deliver. I told you guys that at the beginning of my reporting process, I'll have conversations with my sources and I'll say, hey, here's what I need to write. I need you to help me, right? Like what records exist that you can share with me? Can you, can you point out places that I should look? If there are Facebook posts I should be going back to. And for this story about a woman leaving an abusive relationship, the sister was really on board and really helpful and sort of really got the assignment. And so I had written this as you're looking at right now, using the records that I had. And then she messaged me one day and she said, oh my goodness, so-and-so just posted this video on Facebook. It's a recording of this entire interaction. And it just really sort of blew open the way that I was able to write the scene. So I'll read this and then we'll switch to the newer version. So the message caught Ashley by surprise. It came from a woman she hadn't talked to in years, her husband's former drug counselor, now his friend. The woman said she'd been visiting Ashley's husband. He missed her. Would Ashley go by the house, just talk with him? In the 10 days since, her world had crumbled. Ashley hadn't gotten much sleep. Anxiety attacks kept her up as she wrestled with what was worse, her fear of her ex or her fear of losing him. Bills were coming due, and she was falling behind. Leanna had taken out a $3,000 loan to help. Her son had been asking where Dada was, and every time he did, those hazel eyes staring up at her, she wondered if her knees might crumble beneath her. She knew that it shouldn't, but in those moments, the pain felt so much greater than absorbing his blows. She wanted to go back in time. So it didn't take much convincing for Ashley to gather her son and head toward the home. That's pretty good. Like that's solid on its own. But once my source messaged me and said, holy moly, there's a video of this whole exchange happening. They just posted it on Facebook. I was able to go and download it. And it sort of totally expands the meaning. So everything in yellow are add-ins that were taken from that expanded record, from access to that record. So the message caught Ashley by surprise. It came from a woman she didn't talk to often, her husband's former drug counselor, now his friend. Because of the temporary injunction, Ashley's husband couldn't contact her. The woman said to give her a call. He can't stand being without you. He said he's going crazy, the woman said. Why are you letting your family run your life, Ashley? Ashley sniffled. So again, those are things that I'm hearing in the video, I'm seeing. Anxiety attacks had been keeping her up in those 10 days since she'd left. Bills were coming due. Leanna had taken out a $3,000 loan. Ashley knew that it shouldn't, but in those moments, the pain felt so much greater than absorbing his blows. She wanted to go back in time, she said, unaware that he was there listening in. And so that, again, came from the video. We had video of him there. Now we're able to say, even though we had a sense before that he had been there the whole time, now we have proof. I miss the life we had together, Ashley said. I don't want him back because of the financial support. I want him back because he's my love. If she wanted to come meet with him, the woman said she'd be happy to arrange it on one condition. You do not tell your family about this meeting, she told Ashley. I don't want the cops showing up at my house. So Ashley left her phone behind as she stepped out with her son. So just an example of how helping sources help you can really sort of blow open a story and its context. This is another by a colleague. He wasn't able to go into this person's apartment, and so he literally instructed him, hey, can you walk around with your phone? It sounds weird, but can you just record your apartment, zoom in on the images on your fridge, show me things, talk to me. And by getting that video, even though he couldn't step foot in the apartment, he was able to sort of paint a picture of this person's life. Okay, other. Mostly the internet, social media posts, past news clips, school or athletics promotions, wedding registries, baby registries, obituaries, GoFundMe pages, Venmo activity. This is all stuff online that, if people have their stuff on private, you won't have access to, but a lot of people don't. It's just out there. And so you're able to dig and add color. Facebook. This is a story a colleague did about a rapper, Rod Wave, and he wasn't super game to talk, but Spada found Facebook video that people had posted where there's this interaction. A drive-through customer asked, "Are you that Rod Wave guy?" He smiled sheepishly and shook his head no. So just, again, bringing characters to life. This is, again, the hurricane suicide story that I had mentioned earlier from medical examiners' reports. What you see in yellow is information that I had gleaned from, I believe, largely Facebook posts made by the people and then confirming that those posts did belong to the individuals at the center of it with family members and mutual friends. So it went from a 65-year-old man who had left note making reference to the destruction of his house to a 65-year-old man who had struggled with mental illness most of his life and who had faced housing insecurity once before and was scared to do so again. And likewise, the retired nurse, now we know it's not just a 69-year-old living in Pine Island. We know she's a retired nurse. We know she's still grieving the husband she'd been with for 36 years who had died the year prior, and that they moved from Michigan so he could live out his dream of boating on warm waters, because she was actively sharing this information. And then her body was found after she didn't show up to Thanksgiving. I was connected with her family through Facebook. All right. News clips and Instagram posts. Again, this is the Audrey Peterson story, trying to bring these officers who aren't talking to us to life. We found his former athletics page, so we knew he was a college linebacker. We found other news clips in which he was praised for calming a 10-year-old girl, and we found an Instagram post in which he was named the department's Officer of the Year. And then this is to that point of, like, even if you can't be there when something happens, we go to the scene so that we can see it with our own eyes. And this is a really basic example, but I wasn't in the courtroom when Ashley had this interaction with the judge. I was able to write it the way that I did because I had the audio of the court proceeding and the forms filed, but I just went to the courtroom for a totally different hearing, and I walked in and I thought, this is pretty crazy that there's these huge moments play out in these sort of fluorescently lit, drably carpeted spaces. And then again, oftentimes it's the combination of multiple records that go into writing of a single paragraph. So this is from The Marked Man, which was a story that Christopher Spada and Dan Sullivan did last year about a man who had been on death row and was later exonerated. And every one of these graphs is just chock full of really deeply, deeply, deeply reported facts. So the first one is at least 4 different police records. They looked up what time sunset was on a particular day and looked at historic photos of the mall. They found the menu for restaurants that would have been there at the time. They used police records and old newspaper clips and weather records, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, and that's all from me. So I went a little over. I'm going to try and stop sharing my screen, but before I do, that's my email address. It's lpeace@tampabay.com. You're more than welcome to reach out to me. Also, if you Google me, Lauren Peace, you'll find my contact online. But that is, let's see if I can get out. Am I out?
You're out,
Yes.
yes.
Okay,
So
that is what I have.
I have a question for you, Lauren. How long did it take you to write that story about the woman who was killed by her ex?
Um, Great question. That one was a really long one, so it's not
Yes.
kind of typically it's not the standard. And it from start to finish, it was about 10 months, probably a little under a year. But it was reporting that stemmed from actually a story that I started to report and that never got published. It fell through because domestic violence is really complicated. And so I had spent sort of 3 months beforehand, 2 to 3 months while doing other things, sort of immersing myself with the subject material, specifically the injunction process. So applying for a restraining order in Florida and the relationship between the courts and the police when it comes to those injunctions. And when that story fell through, I was kind of like, okay, I'll pivot. And then we got notification that Audrey had died. I think 2 weeks later, and I sort of knew, okay, I'm gonna dive into this. But it took a long time.
So when students ask about the newspaper sources being verified, you just explain that everything you put in the story is verified.
Yeah.
Do your editors question you on that kind of thing?
Mm, well, so every reporter's relationship with their editor is different. Mine is really collaborative. So I sort of view my editor as like my teammate in reporting the story or in producing the story. And so it's rare that my editor will say, "Well, how do you know that?" Just because it's built into the process, the reporting process and the fact checking process. But there will often be times where I'll say, okay, this is what I have. Like, here's the sourcing document and here's the interview. And so I want to phrase it this way, but can I? Like, do I have what I need to really say this? And vice versa. There will be times where I'll say something sort of loosely and she'll be like, I think you can say this more authoritatively. Like you have the sourcing for it. And so those are really the conversations that we have.
Does anybody have any questions? You can unmute or put your question in the chat. You want to put Lauren on the hot seat?
Come on, y'all.
I don't see any questions.
How do you recommend students to try to build up these muscles for this kind of writing? Because I see that you guys have such strenuous work to do this. So I'm imagining students wouldn't like request records from police stations and stuff like that, but how would you
Yeah.
suggest they start these kind of things?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think well, so I would challenge that a little that they won't request records. I would try really early on to just let them know that they can do that, right? Maybe not police records depending what grade level you're teaching, but I think I didn't learn until really I didn't I'm from West Virginia and we didn't have a school newspaper and we weren't doing I didn't do journalism basically until I was pretty late in college and then my path into this profession was a little delayed because of that. So to me, it blew my mind to know that records exist. And I think sort of instilling that in like students early on is huge. But again, to simplify, I think one of the things that we talk about is I'm a narratives reporter. I spend months on a story, but the things that I just talked about, like observational detail, paying attention to the five senses, getting dialogue instead of an interview. Hey, how do you think about this? Hearing what people are saying back and forth to one another. These are like things that can be employed in any news story, be it a breaking news story or one that we spend a year on. And so I think encouraging students to just start with the five senses. What are they smelling? What are they tasting? What are they, hearing? How writing with color is huge. Another thing that I do with my students is I think there's there can be a misconception that like length equates to quality, which is so not the case. And so I'll give my students assignments where I'm like, tell me a colorful story. I want it to be detail rich, but you only have 50 words. You only have 3 sentences to do it, or you only have, and sort of limiting the frame so that they're practicing stretching those muscles, but without sort of uh, the oh my goodness, like this is a huge mountain to climb. Does that make sense? I hope that was helpful.
That does make sense.
Cool.
Any other questions? Okay. We are going to switch gears, and we are going to talk to Nakylah Carter, who focuses on data, which is interesting to me when I look at all the articles that she's written for education. I always wonder where all that information comes from. So we're going to turn it over to you, Nakylah.
Okie dokie. Hi, guys. Yeah, like she said, I am the education data reporter for Tampa Bay Times. Um, I have just moved to Florida. I haven't been here all that long, so I have worked various different places, like ABC News, the Marshall Project, some business papers, but this is my first time covering education, but being a data journalist, each place is the exact same. So I am going to share with you guys. Let me make sure I'm sharing my screen correctly. Okay. Mm, perfect. Can you guys see my screen? Yes, perfect. Okay. Again, my name's Nakylah Carter, and I am a data journalist. So I kind of wanted to be interactive. I know it's late in the day, but I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to say, what do you like? Do you guys know what a data journalist is? And if so, what do you think that data journalists do?
You can put your answers in the chat or you can unmute if you want.
Yes.
You report on the statistics of education?
Yes, basically, kinda ish. I make the statistics, kind of. I don't make them. It depends, various, kind of. I'm going to explain. So basically, what is a data journalist? Well, as many of us know, a journalist is someone who interviews people, which are sources, and does research to find a narrative, whether it be to explain something or a detail, an event, a phenomenon, or to uncover a truth not yet reported. So, like Lauren said, she's a narrative reporter. She's usually explaining a phenomenon or an event or a very specific event with one specific person. And because I'm a journalist, I do all these same things, except I get to interview some different sources, which is data. That's the best way to think of data journalist as a journalist who just happens to have a little bit more sources at their disposal. So instead of, I have the president of University of Florida that I'm interviewing, Pasco County School Board, members I get to interview, and then I also get to interview their last year's financials. That is kind of the way you would think of data. And so, what is data? Data is anything quantifiable. So, if you can ask how much, how long, how many, to what extent, what changed, and how did it change, that's a data story. So, while it is kind of like statistics, a lot of times it is statistic. It can also be words. Like a data story could be me looking at the change in semantics from one contract to another contract. That is technically a type of data reporting as well. Another thing data reporters do is sometimes we look at research studies or journal articles, and we make them applicable for our audience. So I might see, Sage journals, or like Harvard Law Review make something about education, something about that, a study that they found about education. As a data reporter, it would kind of fall on me to report on that if it was relevant to our readers. Okay. So, wait, how do you interview data? Because I've been throwing around the fact that data is a source, although obviously numbers don't talk. Well, a little bit. So basically, you interview them just how you interview people. One thing that people don't realize is they think you have to still be cynical of data just how you'd be cynical as if you're interviewing a person or you hear an anecdote. Data lies just as much as people do. You can't just assume that because there's a data set that everything is a-okay, because remember, data sets are made by people and people make mistakes. Data is incomplete sometimes. Sometimes you can get a data set and this is like even when I was doing prison reporting, you get a data set from the FBI and there might just be a random blank in it and no one knows why. So that's stuff that data is very usually messy. It's usually unclean, is what data reporters say. And you have to do a lot of interviewing to even get the data in a place where you can even use it. Sometimes it's not indicative of anything at all. Like sometimes the way the data is input into like a data set or something like that is unusable. And going back to FBI statistics, statistics are infamous for being known for being incorrect. It's usually incorrect. And so there's things like that where you have to interview the data. You have to ask, what is a column? Like something as simple as you might think you understand what a column of a data set is, and you might be confused. Or they might be using an acronym that might be incorrect. Something else that happens all the time is a lot of times data sets are put in kind of like one by one, like somebody is manually putting in the data set. And because people are manually putting in the data set, it would maybe Chicago is spelled with a capital C one time, a lowercase c one time, somebody accidentally put an extra O in it. Stuff like that is all the implication that you get with data. So you're just how you're questioning an interview you have with like a politician, you have to question the data that somebody gave you. And also, where did it come from? Like, do they have a stake in making this data seem better than what it is, basically? Um, so, not to go into all of the drag of like the data that I use, but this is an example of kind of like some data that I get when it's kind of in its raw estate. So, to the left, these are some tables from the Florida Department of Education. Um, they came in Excel or CSV, comma separated, Excel files basically, and the way this looks as it is now is not usable for something that I could use. It's because data, most data sets that a lot of data reporters use, depending on what you're reporting on, like so education, politics, I know also these data sets are like thousands and thousands of values. And so you could go in one by one and say, okay, I want to look at, so these are discipline reports of Florida Department of Education. And they're all categories about different things like battery, bullying, robbery, and they all have different subtypes. But this is just for 2016, 2017. And there's like probably like 200,000 rows just in this. And it would be very difficult if somebody were to go one by one of each column and try to find something. So what data reporters do is we put it in a coding language, which you see on the right at the bottom, which is called R. But some people use like Python. There are lots of coding languages. And what we do is we use like formulas, I guess, statistical formulas to very quickly say, I want you to arrange this all by, you know, I want you to group this by county, and I want you to arrange it from highest to lowest based on the fact of bullying incidents for this specific year. We can just basically tell the computer to find that information with code, I guess. Um, so I basically take the data sets, I put them into a programming language to get a story. And this is a story. So this data that I got, I basically made this story. This story was a story, I think this was my first data story that I made when I was at Tampa Bay Times. And basically, I looked at there was more like 6 years of discipline data from the Florida Department of Education. And I originally was looking because I had heard anecdotally from teachers that students' behavior was worse after the pandemic. And so in the 5 year mark after the pandemic was declared, I kind of wanted to see our kids getting to fights more, our kids hurting each other more. And honestly, when I looked at the data, I actually didn't see any correlation. It kind of stayed the same. But one thing, the only thing actually, the only category that I found in all of the different categories of discipline data over a 6 year span was tobacco usage skyrocketed. Like not even casually. And this is a good thing about data reporting. Sometimes you go looking for a story and it's not a story there, and then you find another thing. That's the cool thing about that. Like that's why I say you interview data, because a data is like a source, like just how you're getting coffee with, a person for a story to try to get ideas. You can do the same thing with data. It's a little different, but it's kind of the same. So yeah, so basically I just found out that more and more students are vaping. And, by 2019, the state identified e-cigarettes among the most used substances among middle and high schoolers. So even in this little blurb right here, out of all the coding that I did, the story probably took me maybe a month. It was supposed to take a little longer, but I think it ended up taking me like a month or maybe a little over a month to code this data, find this information, interview people, and work with some of my coworkers. And something as simple as while Hillsborough leaders estimated 1 in 4 students had vaped. That's a very small anecdote, and you probably see stuff like that in stories all the time. I am the person who finds a number like that. That number came from thousands and thousands and thousands of data cells, and I was able to find like this many thousand over this many thousand, and then I was able to see, oh, 1 in 4. Like it's a lot of my work is usually only putting a couple numbers. They're important numbers, but it usually takes a while. And same thing like this, like I say, like mere 4 years later, vaping grew more prevalent and most people involve vaping. A big part of data reporting as well is to use charts to convey very complex ideas. So for this story, I was able to make 2 different charts about the same thing that I found. Because words can be very clunky, and no one wants to read a story where in one paragraph there's like 5 numbers. It gets very confusing. It gets very like, I don't know what's going on. And data journalists usually convey what they find very quickly in charts. So for instance, like I found, like I said, they skyrocketed. K through 12 schools reported nearly 24,000 tobacco incidents statewide just in the most recent year. So it was down from the recent peak, but it was still way more than before the pandemic. And so a chart like this shows very clearly, like I put the coronavirus pandemic right there. You see, okay, the line is nearly straight. That makes sense. People weren't in school, kids weren't in school, they couldn't get in trouble for vaping, they weren't there. And then you see a clear increase. And then even though you see the highest increase, this was the highest increase that was ever recorded prior to the pandemic, it skyrocketed. And then it stayed like that for a while. And so that was, easy chart that I was able to do. And then also I looked at Pinellas and Pasco specifically and saw that tobacco cases dropped but remain higher in the pre-pandemic years. And I was able to able to localize the story and say that not only is this a state issue, but we're seeing it in Pasco and Pinellas. Something that I want to note is, like I said, data can be wrong sometimes. And this story was a prime example as how as a data journalist, a lot of a lot of your natural skepticism is going to play to your advantage. Like some things are just not going to seem right. And one thing that I noticed when I was looking at the data for Hillsborough is Hillsborough's chart was just a straight line down. And Hillsborough is the seventh largest school district in the nation. And for the 2023-2024 school year, on Florida Department of Education site, they said that there were only 50 incidents in the entire school district of K through 12. My spidey senses went off and I said, that doesn't even make sense. That doesn't make sense. There are too many children. And then I looked at Miami-Dade. I looked at other comparable sizes and I was like, that doesn't make sense. And then I ended up calling them because with data, you need to be interviewing the data just like you're interviewing the sources. I called Hillsborough and I was like, why is this? And she kind of just was like, oh, I don't think we put the data in right. But if I had just looked at the data and just immediately just took it as truth, then I would have been reporting something that was just false. So it is important to like second guess what, even though this data set is all professional and fancy and the State Department put it out, does not mean that it's true. And there are lots of times that data reporters get data and they realize there's really nothing I can do with this because it doesn't seem accurate. And it was very easy for me to tell, like, how is the seventh largest school district decreasing at a 50% rate when the other ones that are way smaller than me, like it logically didn't make sense. Um, so yeah, that is really, I didn't want to like, because the thing about data reporting, it's very dense. It can get complicated. So I did want to leave like a good amount of time for questions about how, like, if you have any questions about the meticulous things that I do, or what am I doing, like, what am I working on moving forward for education? And also, if there's any questions specifically about, how do I go about figuring out where this data came from and how do I get the data? So I'm gonna open it up.
So I'm going to start with the questions. I know that the information that's on the FLDOE site is received from the counties. So if the information on the state site is questionable, it's because the information that they're getting is questionable, right?
Yes,
So
correct.
how can you, I mean, what happens, like in Hillsborough County, did you check with the sheriff's office or did you check with anybody else?
Yeah, so immediately when I was going through this information, Hillsborough was an outlier. And the thing about me being a data reporter, and I like, let me go. I put a slide here earlier. Like, I'm a journalist who later learned data reporting. A lot of data reporters, there are a lot of people who are data reporters who came from in like doing computer science, like the tech industry. A lot of people who were just natural coders, they decided randomly, I don't want to be in Silicon Valley anymore. Let me learn how to do journalism. I am a rare case where I had a career in journalism. I wanted to be a regular shoe leather reporter, and then I kind of started getting to the point where because I was doing a lot of criminal justice reporting, I realized that I I guess a lot of people in the criminal justice sector will lie to you. And I wanted to learn how to look to double check with what they're saying, what they were saying was correct. And so I decided to learn data. But because I'm a journalist who later learned data reporting, it is a little complicated. So I put this gift because I was like, yeah, I'm taking my time. I'm not coding like as quick as other people. But I will say that, like I said, this information is a lot of data reporting is, and a lot of just being a journalist, like I'm sure Lauren does this all the time, is using your common sense. Like, does that even make sense? And so when I was doing this reporting and I saw Hillsborough was so much lower than everyone, like by hundreds, I immediately was like, that doesn't make sense if Hillsborough population is the highest in the state. And so I immediately reached out to the public information officer for Hillsborough County Schools, Miss Tanya, and I was like, hey, can we grab a coffee? I kind of want to talk about these numbers. If you're not the one to talk about, can you point me in the right direction? And it was a little bit like pulling hairs a little bit, but I basically was able to just kind of get a statement that said, we do not know for sure if we were inputting the information incorrectly. Like they kind of just said that they weren't sure about it. And because, like you said, these school districts report to the state and the state kind of just regurgitates that information. It's kind of like the example that I was saying, like FBI, crime statistics are infamously wrong. And I had did a story for the Marsha Project at another place I had worked, and what we did was we looked at all the crime statistics at the top 20 metropolitan cities, and we called the local police departments and we asked them their numbers. And I think like 90% of them were incorrect. And so it begs the question like, are things incorrect because the person who got the information reported it incorrectly, or is it incorrect because someone at the school district does it incorrectly? Those are questions that, as a data reporter, I don't know. I just know what I can use and what I can't use, and what I won't get in trouble for publishing and what I will get in trouble for publishing. So, yeah.
That makes sense. Does anybody else have questions?
I do. You said that this particular story took you about a month uh,
Mhm.
to research and write. So is that like your only focus for that month, or do you have like several irons in the fire? I
Yeah.
can't wrap my mind around this one set of data. So I'm
Yeah.
just like, how is she keeping more than one story going? Not
Yeah.
mixing up the numbers.
Yeah. Data reporting is the epitome of juggling things at a lot of times. So basically, because data reporting and investigative reporting usually go hand in hand. Usually when you see like a full, robust investigations, they usually have at least one data reporter on that team. But not that all data, but that doesn't mean all data reports are investigations. But because I did a story on Hillsborough being the um, second second district in the nation with the most book bans, like this past year. That was something that wasn't necessarily an investigation, but it was a data story. But anyway, saying all that to say, usually every data reporter has their own workflow. I usually try to work on like like a story that's gonna take me some weeks. Because one thing that I didn't mention is just how Lauren said she has to request all this information. I spent a lot of my time as a data reporting waiting for my public requests to get back to me. Waiting for I have a cool story idea. I wonder where this information is. And then I call people, I figure out this information exists, and then I do an official public request. And then in Florida, there's no time frame. Like other states that I've been to, they have like time frames where they have to give you the information. Florida doesn't have one. So I spend a lot of my time kind of just like emailing people like, hey, are you gonna give me the information? Because as a data reporter, I need data. So I spend a lot of my time waiting. So usually what I try to do is all the data I request or all the stories that I want to do, like this story, I try to, while I'm waiting, try to think of smaller stories that could be quicker and less like this, less, robust. And so those are stories like I guess example, like what are students' favorite lunch meals during the school year? And that might be something that like a nonprofit might publish, and the data set is already clean, it's already fixed. And that's something all I would have to do is pull that information, do a couple formulas, and maybe not even do formulas, maybe just put it on a spreadsheet and do some filtering. Like I might not even have to code at all. Because a lot of journalists really do use spreadsheets. We usually code when I like the data sets are really big. But stuff like that. Or I try to work on things that I try to work on a big coding project, like something that's going to take a lot of time, and then something that is more anecdotal, like something where it relies more on interviews than a number. So like right now, I'm working on a story on the University of Florida's presidential contracts and how they're making an unprecedented amount of money right now. They're making just a crazy amount of money right now. And I've been working on this story. I put the request in for these contracts in September, like September 1st. I am now on my second draft of the story, and I haven't finished the graphics, and I probably won't finish the story for maybe around Thanksgiving. So that would put that story at about like 2 months or so. But in the meantime, I still go to like a school board meeting. I still, my if a journal article comes out, I might write that up or something like that. But for the most part, I am the type of person that does try to focus on one big project at most. I never try to focus on more than two things at once because you don't want to mess up data. You don't want to mess up data. Sorry, that was a very long-winded answer.
Any other questions? So I just have one more question about the education hub.
Mhm.
So we now have an environmental hub and we have an education hub. How do you guys decide what is important to write about?
Yeah, I think one, so we have Jeffrey Solacek, who is a amazing titan in the education industry. If you've ever read breaking news about Florida education, he probably wrote it. He's great. And Jeff's a great compass to keep on the team for us to know really what the heartbeat is on the ground. And so because I'm a data reporter, I spend a lot of my time looking at data sets and not as much time as the other reporters on the team talking to people. And so like for instance, my book ban story, I got the idea to look into that because I went to a school board meeting and I just talked to moms who were really upset about books being banned. And then I was like, there has to be data about this. And then that's how that story came out. So I think the Education Hub, while we do, especially with higher education, we are obviously reporting on the politics of things, but especially our K through 12 coverage, we really try to talk to people who have a stake in it. Like we talk to people who have children in the district, who teach for the district, who used to teach for the district, teacher unions. Like we really try to have coffees and chat with people that the stuff directly impacts because I'm very well aware that the politics, especially of it, and the finances of it, they're not affecting the people who have to interact with this stuff day to day. So we do try to have things like our news and brews and try to make sure that the people like education specifically, that people that it's directly impacting, like not the legislators, that they're getting something from our reporting, I guess. Like the tobacco story, my main idea was because there was an anecdote in this story that we're seeing it in elementary schools. And, this story, my goal of this story wasn't to say tobacco use, spike and this is what the schools are doing about it. It was more so like parents, teachers, like this is something to keep in mind because, I had a doctor in this story. It's like kids are going to the emergency room, you know? Um, so yeah.
Any other questions? No?
Yeah,
Okay.
this is my email in the back. And because you guys are educators, if I'm always curious about the pulse of education. One thing I want to get better at and the Education Hub wants to get better at is not just reporting about um, stories about like students, obviously, that's important, but stories about teachers. Because you guys are like obviously extremely important to education. And so we want to make sure that we're also doing our due diligence by not only talking about like the finances of the school or school closures, and we're also trying to make sure that we are encapsulating educator stories as well. So, yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
No problem. Here, I'll go ahead and stop.
Hey, so that was two very different perspectives, but very interesting perspectives, and it ties into some of the stuff I'm going to talk to you about media literacy. So I'm going to share my screen now, if I can find it. I have way too many things open on my computer. Here we go. I don't think I'm at the beginning of this, so I'm not. Okay. Okay. So hopefully you are all familiar with our website, tampabay.com/NIE. I'm going to mention that quite a few times today. So just to make sure that you are all going to the right place. Also, I am being mindful of time, so I'm going to skip some of the information, but I will post the presentations on our website along with a link to the video. Okay, so this is me. That's the cat that was tearing up my furniture before the webinar started. Just to give you a little background, I started teaching in about 1990 when I was just a little tiny kid. And I've been working in NIE programs since 2000. I've been with the Times since 2005. And in my spare time, I teach English at St. Leo University and Hillsborough Community College. A lot of what the reporters talked about today was information I just talked to students about because we were talking about research, and they're not quite sure how to research, which I'm sure that you get all the time. It's interesting that Nakylah mentioned that the FBI statistics are generally wrong because when my students were doing debates and they were talking about criminal issues, that's one of the sources that I recommended. So I will not do that anymore. So NIE is a cooperative effort between schools and the newspapers to promote the use of newspapers in print and electronic form as an educational resource. Our goal is to get your students to read and read every day. And one of the ways you can do that with your students is by having the newspaper in your classroom. We provide free curriculum and free newspapers to teachers throughout the state of Florida, actually. Specifically, most of our stuff is geared towards Citrus, Hernando, Hillsborough, Manatee, Pasco, Pinellas, and Polk counties. But we also do provide access to our digital edition to teachers in other counties. So if you know other teachers who are looking for materials, feel free to pass along my contact information. Anybody who's been on a webinar or workshop with me before has heard me talk about this. Research shows that students using the newspaper as an educational resource score more highly on standardized tests. They develop a habit of lifelong reading, and they're more likely to become engaged citizens and regular voters. Where do your students get their news right now? Who wants to answer that?
Social media.
Yes, social media, specifically TikTok, which just fascinates me. The idea is to get them to look at actual verified news sources so that they can become better at knowing what's going on in their communities. And the Tampa Bay Times has been making a concerted effort to specifically focus on local news. It's a great way when students start reading news every day. It's a good way to get them in the habit. It provides a link between the real world and what's going on in their academic programs, and it's also a great way to get students to look at today's critical issues as well as critical issues in the past. We are working on a publication right now that focuses on Florida during the Revolutionary War period. And it's interesting to go back and forth between what East and West Florida was like back then compared to what's going on today. And as far as and also as far as people's rights and trading and tariffs and all that stuff was really important during that time period. Okay, so you all know that newspapers are a primary source, and Lauren did a great job of giving you examples of primary sources. Data is also a great source of a great primary source. We're also a secondary source because not only do we use primary sources to tell the stories, but we also retell those stories and analyze those stories, which makes it a secondary source as well. And of course, we are full of informational text. Most of the activities that we do and most of the lessons that we have relate to the best standards for language arts, because most of the information in the newspaper is considered informational text. And these are just some examples. There are essays, there are articles, there are letters, there are images, cartoons, photographs, advertisements. A lot of those things students are not quite sure how to analyze, and we have some specific lessons where students can actually do that. They can analyze what the visuals are in an ad. They can look for persuasive techniques. They can look for rhetoric, all that kind of fun stuff. And of course, they need to know they need to have news literacy skills. And I'm going to talk about that in the next slides, but I just love these two guys. This is one of my favorite images, but it's also reading newspapers is a great resource for having students evaluate fact versus opinion, comparison contrast, look for information that maybe they want to know that was missing in the article, that sort of thing. So news literacy is the ability to use critical thinking skills to judge the reliability and credibility of news reports. One of the things that my English Composition 1 students told me was that my class was hard because I made them think. As a teacher, that was a huge compliment. But critical thinking skills are something that students definitely need to work on. Media literacy is the ability to identify different types of media and understand the messages that they're sending. So it's important when you're looking at media in general to know that a person created it. It was created for a reason, and you need to understand what that reason is. So I think I'm a little out of order in my slides, but that's okay. So newspapers are a great tool for exploring all subject matters. You can find math, you can find social studies, you can find language arts, you can find financial literacy, all kinds of things in the newspaper. They provide a living textbook that updates and extends information that is contained in textbooks. So the goal is to give the students the information that they need to know and then have them look at what's going on in the world today. We also have a lot of in-depth coverage. As you heard, both Lauren and Nakylah talked about the fact that it takes a lot of time to research the stories. A lot of stuff that they're getting from social media is just basically stuff that's put out there. One of the things I had asked my students recently was, how do you interpret news from Instagram? How do you understand what's going on based on the photo that you're seeing? How do you analyze that? And their response to me was, well, I look at the photo and then I read the comments. So they're reading the comments before they're actually trying to figure out what's going on in the photo. Newspapers are a great tool for informing the public, and it's also really important for students to know what's going on in the public. A lot of this stuff is going to affect them depending on what grade you teach. They might just be interested in local events, but they also might be interested in our food critic articles. They might be interested in future jobs, in transportation, that sort of thing. Again, local news is a public good that keeps communities informed and connected. Basically, if it's going on in the community, somebody is trying to cover it in the news. Most of our reporters are locally based, so they're living in the area. They're going to school board meetings. They're going to, Nakylah mentioned News and Brews, which is an event with our news department where they talk to the general public. We have some spotlight events where we have panel discussions. There's one going on tomorrow evening, talking about the idea of empathy, which will be interesting to hear. But one of the things to remember about the Times is, because we are so local and because we are accountable to the community we serve, we do need to make sure the facts are correct. So if there's an issue with a fact being incorrect, we will correct that. Just some more points about media literacy. It's an essential skill, especially in our world today. It's important for students and adults to become smart consumers. They need to recognize the point of view from which the story is being told. They need to identify what role media serves in our culture. And they also need to understand the author's goals. So just like when you're analyzing literature, they need to know maybe what the purpose is behind the story. So I was just going to mention quickly the difference between a reporter and a journalist. There are lots of reporters out in the world. They post on Facebook, they post on Instagram, they post on TikTok. That's not necessarily a professional journalist, though. A professional journalist maintains high ethical standards, and that's essential to the practice of journalism, especially when the public is talking about journalism being untrustworthy. And also the Foreign Press Correspondents USA noted that journalists and media professionals have a set of rights, duties, and obligations and responsibilities that guide their work, as opposed to people who are just posting blogs or posting information on Facebook. Not that that information is always bad information. A lot of times that information is good information, but it hasn't been vetted. I'm going to skip this. We talked about this. Nakylah and Lauren both talked about how they have to make sure all the information is verifiable. One of the things that we try to do in the newsroom is just put the facts out there. Obviously, we have an editorial board, we have an opinion page, we have letters to the editor. All of those things it contain opinions and possibly biased views. But when you're talking about the newspaper itself, you're talking about the articles, the articles should just be to promote the facts. That being said, the choice of what goes where in the newspaper people can be concerned about what makes what's on the front page. Why is this headline so big? Why is this other headline so small? That sort of thing. So this is just an example that I like to remind teachers that it's not just the newspaper, but also our NIE publications. I wrote a publication called Separate is Not Equal for the 70th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education. One of the people I interviewed for this publication was Jan Atkins. She was a teacher in Pinellas County the year that the schools became integrated. And she was telling me all kinds of stories of things that happened. So I obviously took her personal experiences, but then I also went back into our archives to vet the information to see if the news was also carrying the stories that she told me about, which of course it was. And this is just an example of an article that I found in the newspaper. I don't know why I didn't put the year on here, but it's probably in the early 1970s. And it was during the time that teacher was at that school. Another thing to think about when you're thinking about news and media in general is that there are different types of information neighborhoods, and those different types of information neighborhoods have their own types of rhetoric. So whether the goal is to inform, to entertain, to sell or promote something, to build support, or to bypass things, they all of those fall into different categories, obviously with writing styles and with dispersing information. So the American Press Institute has kind of laid out these questions for critical thinking and interpreting media. And I'm going to go a little bit more into detail in a second. Basically, these are the key questions to ask. Who made the message? Who's the target audience? Who paid for it? Who might benefit or be harmed by the information? What important info is left out or missing? Is the source credible, and what makes you think so? And is the main point proven by verifiable evidence? Components of a news article usually answer the who, what, why, when, where, and how questions. We have lots of activities for teachers to do with their students to analyze news articles that we actually have a teacher guide that I can show you that has some resources in there. And then, of course, the idea of fake news. So fake news has taken on kind of its own identity recently. People are saying that things are fake when in reality they are not. The information might be skewed, but the factual basis is still there. One of the things that I was talking to my students about today was logical fallacies, which we see a lot everywhere. We see that in editorials. We see that in the legislature sessions. We see that all the time. So these are some reminders, again, to consider the source, check the author, check on the date, which is very important. Consider your bias when you're reading something. Go beyond just the headline. A lot of times, if you're just looking at the headline, you're not getting the complete picture. Look for supporting sources. Be wary of joke sites. It's important for students to know that it's not a good idea when you are writing a research paper, to quote The Onion, for example. And then, of course, asking the experts. Ask a librarian. Obviously, a teacher is an expert. Checking some fact-checking sources. So again, when you look at the byline, you want to know who wrote it. Is it a real person? And does the real person have credentials to be writing what they're writing? If you're looking for additional help with teaching about media literacy, the MediaWise program at the Poynter Institute is a great source. They have all kinds of videos on their website, and they have all kinds of handouts. They do some webinars and stuff as well. So that it's a really good source if you're looking for more information to teach students about media literacy. Oh, look at that. I put it outside. I put these in a weird order. When I talk about identifying the source, again, the idea of who owns the web page, it's important when you're looking at news sites to consider that as well. Also, when I was talking to my students and I asked them what happens when they Google, a lot of them said that aside from AI and Wikipedia coming up, the next thing that comes up is sponsored sources. And if a source is sponsored, it's important to know that it is probably not unbiased. We already covered that. And then video images. Video images can be tricky. Sometimes it's hard to tell if they've been edited or changed. It's also important to kind of be aware of who took the video. I've watched our photojournalists at work, and I'm just amazed at all the different angles they try to take. But when you're seeing that photo on Instagram or you're seeing that photo on TikTok, you're only getting one angle. So you don't necessarily know what happened before, what happened after, or if there's some other angle that is just being obscured. So here's just some other ideas for checking sources. One of the things that I've been reading a lot recently is talking about lateral literacy. I think that some of the things Lauren said kind of approach that, because she not only took factual information she had, but then she compared it to photos and videos, people's journals, people's logs. Obviously, when you're dealing with data, it's important to know that where you're getting the data from is very important to know if it's accurate or not. One of the examples that Nakylah mentioned was the Department of Education website. And one of the things I found out, again, is it's only as good as what the counties are feeding it. So we just had a glitch with email addresses. When I had contacted the state, they said, well, we only update those like every fall, and it's only what the county gives us. So a lot of those things can get outdated very quickly. Here's some more fact-checking sources. These are just all good ways to verify information. And students know most of these on their own, but they're also a good resource for them. There's some more. Okay, so to just talk a little bit about the Tampa Bay Times NIE program. If you are not a Tampa Bay Times NIE teacher, you can still sign up to become one. You would just click on you would click on the sign up here link and fill out the online request form. And I'm going to show you that in a minute because I'm going to show you the electronic edition. So the Tampa Bay Times, I mentioned this before, but all of our resources are free to teachers. We provide access to the print paper, depending on what county you're in, and the digital newspaper. The Times prints a newspaper Wednesdays and Fridays. It is delivered to schools on Wednesdays. The digital edition is new every day, 7 days a week. And once you have the access code to get into that on our NIE site, then your students can use it for homework. They can use it in class. They can use it for research and that sort of thing. And I think I'm gonna, oh, this is just, I just put this up to remind me to go to the digital edition. This was a great article that ran in today's newspaper that is focused on one of our science fiction writing contest judges' sons. And I just thought this was a great article that Stephanie Hayes wrote just to let you know that there's good news in the newspaper. It's not always about bad news. So I am going to switch and pull up the internet if I can do that. Let's see. I have lost my little button. Okay. There we go. So you should be looking at our website, yes? Okay. So this is our website. All of the information, all the lesson plans and things that we have are on this website. We have curriculum supplements that are listed under curriculum. We have weekly lessons that update once a week. That range from videos to geography quizzes to writing prompts and discussion prompts. And we also have a monthly topics page, which gives you resources for specific things that are going on during a specific month. So for example, we listed the sources we have for Holocaust education, and then we also listed some other sources that supply educational materials. One of the things I've been trying to do is go in and make sure these are all accurate. As you probably know, some of the government websites have changed their pages, so these should all be currently correct. There's also some really good videos and educational information and teacher guides on PBS, so we have those listed as well. There's a lot going on in November. Okay. So we have National Native American Heritage Month coming up. We have, if you're doing anything for Veterans Day, we have some Veterans Day resources. We have civic education that you can talk about. And of course, we have the Florida Holocaust Education Week. And before I show you the newspaper, I'm just going to give you an example of one of our curriculum supplements. This is since I used the image from Separate is Not Equal, I'll go ahead and point to that one. So we did a publication, I believe it's a 16-page publication, it might be 20, for the 70th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education. And I interviewed people who were alive and living and going to school as either students or teachers during the 1970s when schools started to desegregate in Hillsborough, Pinellas, and Pasco counties. So if you click on this link, it will take you to the publication. And then you can download the publication. You can look for specific photos. There's a timeline in here. We unfortunately do not have any print copies of this publication. But it is fine if you pull information from it and put it up on your Canvas. The interviews start around here. So we have some interviews from people from Hillsborough County, people, now I don't remember. Yes, she's from Hillsborough County as well. Chloe Coney, who is an exemplary person, actually was part of the desegregation of a middle school in Hillsborough County. She told her parents that she wanted to desegregate the middle school, and they were not happy with that idea, but she wanted to do it because of this photo. So she went and she saw at the school she was at in elementary school, she saw President Kennedy's motorcade come to Tampa, and he told her personally, is the way she remembers it, that you should ask not what your country can do for you, but for what you can do for your country. So that was a very powerful thing for her. And then we also, the other thing I want to point out about the activities is that we've listed the standards under every activity. So the standards are in two places. One is under the activities, and then one is on the back page. So I'm going to, let's see if this will let me go back. There we go. We also have other sources listed for some of our projects. For this one, we did a teacher guide. We did, I did more interviews than we could fit in the publication, so they are accessible as well as PDF. We also did a teacher webinar. All of that stuff is listed. Same thing for Bearing Witness, in which we focus on the Holocaust. We have all the resources that we have for that publication are listed underneath it. So if you have any questions, if there's something specific you're looking for, feel free to send me an email. I'm happy to help to let you know if we have that information. We have lots of things. They're categorized by subject level. Okay, so before I lose you all, let's go to the newspaper. So when you click on login here, the digital newspaper will come up for you. And this is an exact replica of the Tampa Bay Times in digital version. So the students can look at it, turn pages like a newspaper. They can, I'm trying to find something not political. I'm going to go to the local section because that's where I pulled that other story. There we go. This is the story that I pulled for my PowerPoint. You can click on the story and it will come up. You can actually have the students listen to the story with this little audio feature, and they can listen to the story in English and they can read it in Spanish, which is an interesting tool as well. Also, if you go to our archive section, you will see past issues of the newspaper. This only goes back about a month, but I found an interesting way to do research recently. If you click on this little search tool, a teacher asked me if we had any information about shell mounds. So I typed in shell mounds and I clicked all editions, and I got resources back from 2003 and 2004. So students can use this as well to search for things. The one thing I will tell you to be careful about is when students search, their searches shouldn't be too broad. So if I just put in shell mounds without the quotation marks, I get all of these great articles about baseball because there's a pitcher's mound in baseball. So there's all of these archives talking about baseball when that's not what I was looking for. So it's a good way to get students to be more selective in the way that they research as well. Another great feature of the digital edition is that you can download articles and save them. So if I click on, I think it's the print button. Yes. So the print button will take me to, this is today's paper, and I can pick a specific page that I want to save as a PDF, or I can save an entire section. So I know that, for example, I am going to go back to Sunday. What was Sunday? Sunday was what day of the week? Sunday was the 2nd. Okay. So if I click on Sunday's paper, I should see this is the second part of Wasting Away, which was the first part of Wasting Away was an investigative report focusing on the pollution and the manatees. And this is the second part. So if you wanted to, you could actually save this as, you could save this whole thing as a PDF if you're not doing this particular lesson right now. And then oops. There you go. And then the last thing I'm going to show you on the digital edition is you can look by sections. There are two ways to do that. One is the section list, and then one is a section list this way. You can, again, you have links to download. You can create clippings. You can create sections. I was talking to the social studies supervisor in Hillsborough County for elementary school, and she was telling me that she didn't realize that they could take clippings of the newspaper articles and also our NIE publications. So you don't have to, if you're teaching students who are younger, you don't necessarily have to focus on the entire information. If you feel that the material is too much for them, you can just focus on individual pictures or what's the word I'm looking for? Articles. So I am just going to go back here to my PowerPoint, and you should all have my contact information, but there it is again. It's the easiest way to get a hold of me is through email. I can also, in addition to helping you maybe find some stuff in the newspaper, I can help you find our educational resources. I know that there are some teachers out there that enjoy having reporters come to their classes. You can email me about that too. And we also have a Facebook page. Our Facebook page has been updated except for this week. It's usually updated on a weekly basis, so a daily basis, so that you can find out what's going on. So when we have contests, which we have two contests coming up in January, when we have new publications coming out, we actually have this is a little scary to me, but we actually have 13 new NIE original supplements coming out starting in January, kicking off with something called Counter Speech, which is an interesting story about freedom of speech and college students during the civil rights period. So we have lots of stuff coming up. If you are signed up to be an NIE teacher and get newspapers, you get that information from me in a weekly email. If you are not signed up to get newspapers and you don't want to get newspapers, but you do want to use our educational materials, send me an email and I will be happy to stick you on that email list. Any questions for me?
Can you share that slide about how to identify fake news, please?
Absolutely.
And then the other question I had was, I was a journalism major in college, and I remember hearing that newspapers were written at a middle school reading level. I think that's what I remember. Is that still true? Or what is your
Yes.
opinion of what reading level?
So, I remember being told that the New York Times was at somewhat of a like eighth or ninth grade reading level, and that was the highest. When I've talked to our newsroom and I've asked that question, they couldn't tell me the specific reading level, but I think it's fair to say that it is upper middle, lower high school. Is this a slide you were looking for?
It is. Thank you.
Okay. And I will post these on our website. So if you want to take it, I think this is just an image that I posted. I'm trying to find, I told you we were going to do drawing, and now I need to figure out, I have a fancy way of doing that. Does anybody else have any questions while I'm playing with my computer? Okay. The one thing that I do not know about you all, because it was not listed on our form, which we need to change, is what schools you're in. So if you do email me and you want to have educational materials sent to you, then please just make sure you let me know what school you're in. I also, one of the things I want to point out real quickly to you, let me go back to this for a second, is when you go to the curriculum supplements page, and I'm just going to do social studies again. Some of these publications we no longer have print copies of. I'm sure that you all know that our building in downtown St. Pete was destroyed by Hurricane Milton, and a lot of materials that we had in there are now gone. So a lot of the things we have that are not available anymore in print will say this publication is not available in print. If it is available, like Bearing Witness, I'm trying to think of the other ones. We have lots of copies of Space for All. We do not have any more copies of History of Chocolate, but The Science of Chocolate is going to be coming out in January or February. So if it does say that we don't have any print copies, I can't send you any. But if we do have print copies, no matter where you are in the state, I can mail those to you. Okay, let's see if I can find my little wheel. Oh, it might be too hard to do this. Oh, here we go. Can you all see the wheel?
Yes.
Or are you still seeing the website? Okay, excellent. So I'm going to paste your name. Oh, I pasted your email addresses. That is not what I wanted to do. I was going to paste your names. I will just paste your last names. Oops. Okay, there we go. And I will spin the wheel, and whoever it lands on is going to win a $25 Apple TV's gift certificate. So there we go. Congratulations. Let me write that down before I forget.
Thank you.
It's always helpful when some people don't show up, right? Because then
Good
we have you have better odds, yes. Does anybody have any other questions or comments? Nope. Okay. Well, you have that had the pleasure of being in our last webinar for the fall semester. We will have some new ones coming up in January specifically. I know we have one scheduled for at the end of January for Black History Month, and I know that we also are going to do one for the Florida in the Revolutionary War period, which we're very excited to get out in print. We've been working on that for a really long time. So if you don't have any questions, I will let you go. And I will be emailing you certificates of completion, and Summer, I will grab your address to mail the certificate.
Great.
But
Thank
other
you.
than, what was that?
I just said thank you and good night.
Oh, thank you and good night. Have a wonderful evening and rest of the week.
Thanks. Have a good night.
You too.